Well, hello everyone. We appreciate you all coming today. We're probably not the two presenters you thought you were going to see when you came into this classroom and thought you were going to be taught about broadcast. I can assure you we're two very highly qualified people to be teaching on this. In fact, Emily, if you want to go to the next slides, we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about producing live news.
First of all, I'm Grant Johnson. I'm the 2021 Texas High School Journalist of the Year. I'm the National High School Journalist of the Year runner-up for last year. I'm a two-time NSPA Broadcast Pacemaker Award winner at two separate schools. I'm a freshman television and digital media production major at Ithaca College in New York. And I'm one of the producers of our news show called Newswatch.
All right, so a little bit about myself. I'm a junior television and digital media production and legal studies double major at Ithaca College. I am currently the news director of Ithaca College Television, ICTV. I oversee the production of 5 news shows in the news department. I'm also an on-call reporter and producer at KQED in San Francisco, where I've had the chance to cover a wide variety of stories and breaking news as well. And this summer, I will be working with NBC in Washington, D.C.
Here's a little overview of what our session is going to be like today. We're going to scratch the surface on pretty much all the things that we could think of, broadcast and live news. Emily, you want to?
Yeah. Next slide.
Yep.
Okay.
So first of all, we want to say you guys know more about broadcast than you realize. Some of you guys come in here as newspaper, yearbookers, maybe you're broadcast and have a basic or even advanced knowledge and you're just here to learn more. But those skills that you guys learn in your journalism classes, the same ones that are taught across the country, they all apply to broadcast. So that's basically what we're going to get at here. We're going to show you that you really know more than you do. It's just about applying it into a different medium.
Yeah, so I just want to start off with talking about the similarities between broadcast and print journalism, because it can be intimidating for schools that focus on print to start exploring broadcast. But the basics of journalism are all used in broadcast. So we have news writing, which is basically the foundation to everything. If you can write, you can pretty much do anything. And you can really transfer the skills that you learn in print to broadcast. So for example, like conducting interviews, storytelling, news values, and ethics, all of those apply to broadcast as much as it does to any other medium in journalism.
So it all starts with the stories. People watch news for well-told, timely stories. Broadcast moves fast, and so if you're not keeping up, people aren't going to watch you. That's just how that works. One of the best things that I like about broadcast is we get to connect national stories to the local setting. Pretty much every big thing affects somebody, right? We have the Russia and Ukraine going on right now. You might know somebody that's Ukrainian, you might know somebody that's Russian in your community, how that affects their families, different things like that. So with broadcast, we get to tell those stories and provide that national to local connection. You can have all these fancy graphics, you can be the best on-air people, but if you don't have good stories, nobody's going to care about your newscast, because if your storytelling's weak, then your whole newscast is going to be weak.
Yeah, so these photos, 4 photos down here, are some of the examples of us localizing national news that we've done. So that third photo, that's Grant's flood reporting live hit, which is a good example of localizing national news. So basically last semester, in around, I would say it's like October, we had a nor'easter that hit the East Coast, and it caused considerable damage to many states. But in Ithaca specifically, it resulted in mass flooding. So Grant actually pitched this story to me, and we sent him down, and he was able to do a live hit from actually one of the locations that was flooded, as you can see in the photo. Another example is the national movement of Starbucks locations unionizing, which many of you might know about this. And we were able to localize this story by focusing on the Starbucks locations in Ithaca that actually have unionized.
So you want to think about your audience. Of course, for most of you guys, you're all high school journalists, so you want to find the stories that they care about and find that right angle. There's so many different ways that you can cover a story, as I'm sure you all know from your journalism classes, but you want to, in broadcast, avoid broad focuses. In broadcast stories, you only have 1 minute and 30 seconds to 2 minutes, if you're lucky. You might have to have your package around 1 minute. You don't really have time to get into details. And so by having that very narrowed down focus, that way you can focus on one thing, you don't get off on random places, and you don't end up racking up time. So every story really starts with something called a focus statement. So it's a 1-sentence summary of your package that you can go back to and say, did I fulfill my focus statement? Is my story exactly what I wanted it to be? And it should only be 1 sentence, because you don't really have enough time for it to be any longer. And this last bullet point down here says, always have your news radar on. One of the things that Emily didn't mention about my flood reporting is that I was on my way to Walmart to get a Halloween costume and saw some flooding out there. So I texted Emily. I'm like, hey, Emily, our whole town's flooding and nobody knows about it. Should I cover it? And she said, of course. So I went back, bought myself some rain boots, and I made my roommate stand in the median of the highway, and I went out and I stood in the water. So always have your news radar on. If you see something, shoot it. If you this content moves very fast, and so if you're seeing something, maybe the chance that somebody else hasn't seen it. So go out, shoot it. Yeah. Yep, and that's the video right there.
Yeah, I'm gonna play it.
Are you going to? Okay. Grant Johnson here down in Ithaca. We're located right outside the Walmart, and as you can see, the floodwaters from the rain that have happened over the last couple of days are really adding up, and it's making it very dangerous for drivers on the road today. If you could see, this floodwater is up to the top of my boot right here. That's certainly not safe for any cars. So if you're going to get out tonight and into tomorrow morning, please be careful on the roads. As you can see, we're at this intersection right here. Cars are coming and going, but it is dangerous to see those floodwaters. You'll see this car as the light turns green right here, going out of that floodwater. Now, granted, I'm here in this floodwater where you can't even see the curb over here. All you can see is a stop sign right here. So please be careful. If you're going to go out tonight and into tomorrow morning, please drive with caution. The roads and the flooding can be higher than you originally think. So in Ithaca, I'm Grant Johnson for ICTV News.
So we actually posted this on Instagram, and Grant was on camera and I was the one doing the behind the scenes stuff. I basically wrote a whole caption just elaborating more on what Grant was saying in his live hit.
Yep. Developing story ideas come in a lot of different places. I'm going to give you some of my super secret places where I find stories. They're not going to be super secret after this. But follow lots of prominent leaders on social media. I have an account solely just for broadcast because I don't want my personal life to be intertwined with what the mayor's doing, what the police chief's doing, all that stuff. I don't know about you guys. I just don't really care about that in my personal life. So I also follow on the Facebook moms pages. Now, I know it can be a little difficult to get into the Facebook mom pages, but if you go on and when you're filling out the question, it's like, why do you want to join? What street do you live on? How many kids do you have? If you go in and put, I'm a journalist looking for story ideas, I've always been accepted on all of those because they want their gossip to be spread other places. That's just how that works. I also follow our competitors. Maybe they told a story, but you can do it better. So look out for your competitors. And then after a story's complete, go out and stalk the people that you did your stories on, because maybe they'll post something good for the next time, and that way you can find that. Connections, it's not something that you're going to build overnight. Like I said, go out and stalking them, following them, commenting on their posts, stuff like that. They're going to be more willing to come back to you and say, hey, I have this story, hey, I have this, hey, I have that. Press releases are also another really good thing that you can do. They're going to add you guys. Even though you're student journalists, it doesn't matter. They still want their content to be pushed out. Sending an email like, hey, my name is Grant Johnson. I'm a reporter for Ithaca College Television. I would like to be added to your mailing list. Send that to your police chief, your city officials, anything like that. They'll send you your press releases, I guarantee it. And then anniversaries. Go back and look at archives of your publications. I do this quite often. If I'm stuck in a slump and I can't think of a story idea that I want to cover, I can go back. Hey, maybe around this time, this event normally happens. See if it's happening this year, if they're celebrating any milestones, anything like that. So, yeah. This is my friend Tiffany Liu of WFA in Dallas. She's a very good journalist. And I asked her about my session and how she builds connections so well. She does it very well. And she said, connect with people outside of stories. Don't just reach out to them when you need something. It's okay to text and check in and say, hey, I'm heading to my meeting. Do you have any stories going on? I can pitch it today. Or say, how are you? Hope to work with you soon. Another thing is, it takes time to build trust, and that's okay. Sometimes it can take years, and you have to be patient. No one owes you their trust. We have to earn it. We earn it by doing good, honest, and building a good repertoire that way. So that's what she says about that. Connections, you're not going to build them over time, but if you're following them, commenting, being engaging, they're more likely to open up their lives to you.
All right, so now we're going to talk about story angles. So sometimes, news can be slow and there's just not that much going on. But you can still come up with new ways to tell stories that you've covered in the past by approaching the story through a different angle that hasn't been looked at before. So essentially you can find different ways to make stories around the same topic that'll still be meaningful to viewers. So we're seeing this right now with news coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. These are stories that we're hearing basically on a daily basis, but sometimes these stories are interesting and worthy to watch because reporters have found ways to make the stories fresh and have new information. So some examples of that that we're seeing stories about COVID from the perspective of a frontline worker, COVID long haulers' effects on children's mental health, inequities in COVID vaccine distribution, and also anti-Asian hate and violence that's been fueled by the pandemic. So these are all just like different angles and different ways to tell a story about one issue. So circling back to something that I mentioned before about the Starbucks unionization effort, so this is an example of something that I'm currently working on that I was able to use different angles to tell this story. So basically the 3 Starbucks locations in Ithaca have been campaigning to unionize for the past 3 months. So in a news show that aired just last week, I shot and edited an 8-minute story looking at just what's happening at Starbucks, why it's happening, and a preview of what's to come, which was the election, deciding whether or not the locations would unionize. And so this story aired on March 30th. About a week after my first story aired, I edited down that story to just 2 minutes and focused on doing a preview of the ballot count by the National Labor Relations Board, and also looking at the impact that unionizing would have on Ithaca Starbucks locations. So this story aired just 2 days ago on Thursday, April 7th, since the ballot counting happened yesterday. So now that the results were announced yesterday, I'm planning to create a follow-up news package on the vote and reactions that'll air tomorrow, April 10th, on one of our news shows. And in case you are curious, Ithaca is the first city to have all of its Starbucks locations unionized.
In the country,
yeah, in the country. So that was the decision that came out yesterday. So this is just an example of how you can essentially tell 3 different stories around the same topic or issue.
I was just wondering how y'all got in contact with your Starbucks locations and got them they allowed you to come in and film. I'm assuming
Yeah.
create these stories in it, because I know personally for us we reach out to businesses, and especially when it comes to chain restaurants and businesses, it's kind of hard for them to allow you to come in. So how did you approach that?
Yeah, so this story, I actually did have many difficulties doing this story because first of all, I reached out to Starbucks for an interview. Of course, they declined one. They just sent me a statement, which it was the same statement they sent every single other news organization who reached out to them. And they also told me I was not allowed to film inside their stores. So what I did to get B-roll shots was I stood outside of Starbucks. I put my phone against the window and I recorded the inside because technically I'm not inside, so that's allowed. I also, yeah.
She's a journalist, can you tell?
So that's how I got B-roll shots. In terms of the interviews, I am part of, and Grant mentioned this, Facebook groups. So I'm part of a Facebook group that includes the whole city of Ithaca. So just anyone who lives in Ithaca is part of that group. So I reached out in that group asking for anybody who worked at Starbucks who knew about this movement to reach out to me if they wanted to share their story. And so I got so many responses from that. And so that's how I was able to actually talk to campaign organizers and also baristas at Starbucks who were involved in this movement. A lot of them are also college students. So I did interview somebody who also goes to Ithaca College, which is the school we're from. And I also was able to speak with students from Cornell University, who a lot of them also work at Starbucks. So yeah, it was difficult though, trying to get people and recording footage.
All right, now we're going to go over how to take your print stories and turn them into broadcast. Fair little disclaimer for you. I've never done it this way. I've only done it backwards. I've been a broadcaster and I've been forced to write articles, and so I had to do it the other way, but I do know how it works. So I'm going to start more with broadcast because that's what I know and how it transfers over. So with broadcast or with print here, and by the way, we'll share these slides with you at the end. So in print, you're doing topical organization, right? You'll have several different sections, and then you're writing in the inverted pyramid. Usually you're going to do chronological order because that's how the article will be set up. But with broadcast, you want to write to what you have. if you don't have video of that thing that you want to talk about, chances are you're not going to be able to talk about it, because we're a visual medium. If you can't say it and you can't show it, then you can't use it. So we write more to our video. So if we notice something, if we see something, something like that, but if we don't have B-roll for it, we can either do a stand-up with that information in it, or you don't use it at all. Because unlike the paper, right, if you're writing an article, that can just be a sentence and maybe you don't need a photo for it or an infographic. But with broadcast, you have to think what's going to be going over that. So the way that we do that is we write to our video. Whatever video we have, we write about it, and that's how we do it. We use short declarative sentences. As you can tell, I don't have a wide vocabulary, and that's because I write like a broadcaster with little sentences. And articles, you do a different variety in sentence types. And then in broadcast, you write like you're talking to your friend. One of my mentors, who's a journalist at an NBC station in Dallas, she told me that you want to write your packages like you're explaining it to your grandma, because maybe your grandma's the one that's watching the package. So conversational, no jargon. You don't need the big words, because with broadcast, somebody's probably doing the dishes. They're probably watching something else. They're multitasking. You want to make sure that they're not going to be able to hear all this in-depth information. Just be conversational with it. No need to have the complex terminology. Broadcast stories are delivered in a single whole. Like, they're one piece. You don't have extra stuff unless you do social media content, which we'll talk about later. But it's one whole piece. So you need to make sure that you get all that information in there, so you can really only scratch the surface on certain things that you do. With the print stories, maybe you're having an infographic, you have different chunks, photos, different stuff like that. But with broadcast, it's just one whole piece. You want to just scratch the surface and make sure that you get in all that information. Broadcast stories are based on what's new, what's now, and what's next. With articles, you might be doing recaps of things. We typically try and avoid recaps of events because it already happened. Maybe we'll warn our viewers that something is going to happen, but stories that already happened are old news. People don't really care, oh, this happened, because they can't go until next year, or if it's like a weekly or a monthly thing. So write articles, you're writing content based on narratives, applications, different things like that. Broadcast, just what's now and what's next is what we talk about. Same thing, the visuals of both mediums are pretty similar. We will weave visuals into our broadcast stories. So one other thing that you can do, if you don't have video of something, you can make a graphic of it. That's another thing that you can do. And then with articles, you'll have stuff spread out. Any questions on that? Because I know that that was like a big part of why people wanted to come to this session, because maybe you're looking to take those skills that you learned while you're writing newspapers and turning them into broadcast. So those are the main differences. Of course, there's a couple more things, but that's the things that you want to pinpoint. Just remember, we only have 1 minute to 2 minutes to tell a story. It's not a long article where you can go in depth in things. But you could still tell great stories in broadcast. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys an example of print to screen right here. This is how I did it. I mentioned I did it backwards, but it's still the same thing. So this story is about an undercover investigation of a pet store that was abusing their animals. They get their animals from puppy mills. If you guys don't know what that is, it's just terrible breeding facilities. I covered, like Emily, she covered that Starbucks story 3 times. I've covered the story twice now. So the first time was about how an investigation was being launched, and then the second story is how the investigation concluded. The city took action when really they didn't, and so their lack of action is what my story was about. So this article right here on the left here was posted in the Hilltop Times. Shout out to them. I don't know if anybody knows. And so that article, I interviewed so many pet owners. They sent me so many photos. I talked to so many people at the United States Humane Society. So that way I could go really in depth. If somebody wanted to read about how the terrible things that happened to somebody's dog after they bought it from this pet shop, they could. I don't have time to put that in a broadcast story. So we could go ahead and watch this broadcast story. It is 3 minutes. That's longer than most broadcast stories, but there's a lot of information jam-packed into this. So
there's something so small that can be such a big decision for any family.
You know, it's hard. You know, the kids went and we all kind of fell in love with the puppy, of course.
After falling in love with the puppy in the window, Susie Seymour and her family purchased a Maltese named Logan from Petland in Frisco, only to bring him home and find out he was severely ill.
We noticed his nose running at the store, and we did bring it to the sales retention, but she said, oh, allergies. The vet diagnosed him with Giardia and upper respiratory infection.
Logan was diagnosed with Giardia from the Family Pet Center, the establishment that Petland customers must use if their puppy is sick, per the contract signed at the time of purchase. Adeline Alcala interns there and has seen dozens of sick dogs from Petland come through the doors.
We get sick dogs all the time with like Giardia, like internal parasites, and like it's really bad, like the number of them that come in like sick, and so since we're partnered with them, like it's our goal to try to get them better.
Several individuals who purchased sick puppies from Petland formed animal rights group Texans Exposing Petland. They spend their time on Saturday afternoons here, at the corner of Gaylord Parkway and Preston Road. Protesters hold signs supporting a ban on the sale of puppies in a retail storefront.
This whole issue has been going on for many years. A retail store needs to sell a lot of dogs and cats to survive.
Rebecca Whitehouse is a lawyer and animal rights activist who urged the city of Frisco to pass a ban last winter. As a result of several hearings, the city decided to only pass an ordinance instead of the ban she was hoping for.
The ordinance has a number of paperwork, record-keeping kind of requirements for the store. It has, cleanliness and basic standards for the animals, but because we're talking about a systemic situation, it's never going to fix the bigger issue.
The activists believe that the ordinance avoids the roots of the problem and only addresses what happens to the puppies while they're at Petland, but not where they come from.
The city is terrified of being perceived as unfriendly to business.
So for now, the activists continue their fight for a localized solution such as a ban, hoping for a piece of legislation like ones passed in Austin, El Paso, and San Antonio.
I hope we can stop it, because I don't want it to happen to anyone else, because it's bad. Bringing a dog home it's not just a dog. I mean, he's part of the family, and it's really emotional, so.
Susie and her family opted to surrender the dog to Animal Services, and Texans Exposing Petland is gathering new resources to present to the city. For Hilltop News, I'm Grant Johnson.
So that's how I could show you. I couldn't put as many of the different victims in there as I wanted to, so I saved that all for the article there, and they were posted together. Yes, ma'am.
What did Petland have to say in this story?
Petland declined to comment 3 separate times. So, yeah. Yes, yep. So after this package played on our broadcast, we had an anchor tag. Basically, the anchor just adds more information. So in that, they said, Petland declined to comment. So, yep. Yeah. All right, we can go on.
All right, so now switching gears a little bit, I'm going to go over some broadcast terms that it's helpful to know. So the first one and the most important one is the rundown. So this is basically the backbone to your show. Without it, the show wouldn't be able to happen because nobody would know what to do. The rundown essentially lays out all of the elements of your show, whether it's the stories the anchors will read or all of the visual elements like the videos and graphics. So there are 2 types of video that's most commonly used. The first one is VO, that stands for video only or voiceover. And basically, when the video is that's when a video is being played, but an anchor is still talking over that video. The other type of video is a SOT, and that's sound on tape. That's essentially where when the video is being played and there's sound. So, for example, that could be like if you're playing an interview clip, that would be a SOT. Now there are 3 types of graphics that are most commonly used. The first one is the OTS. That's the over the shoulder, and that's a graphic that appears either on the left or right hand side of an anchor's shoulder depending on where they're sitting at the desk. Then there's also full screen graphics, which basically is graphic that covers the entire screen. And then there are CGs. So this is basically Chiron. The most common one that's used on TV are lower thirds. So I'll be showing you examples of each one. Okay, so this is an example of VO.
Ring doorbell has captured footage of a police officer attacking an autistic 17-year-old teenager in Vacaville, California. The teen's father posted the video online, and it has since gone viral. The incident took place last Wednesday, and as you can see here, the video shows the teen named Preston standing on the sidewalk with his scooter. And the police officer there exited his vehicle and approached him. The officer then yelled and threw the teen's scooter, forcing Preston to the ground, and he proceeded to punch Preston in the face. Vacaville's police department's acting chief said that a full investigation into the incident is underway.
For your broadcast, you can definitely shoot original video, and I actually encourage my reporters and producers to shoot their own footage for their shows. But in the case of like national and international news, sometimes that's just not possible. So our school does have a license with CNN News Source, which basically we're able to utilize anything there for our broadcast. So that video you saw, we pulled from CNN News Source and just gave whoever shot that credit. And you can also reach out through social media, email, or by phone to photographers or videographers just asking for their permission to use their footage. If you see it on social media and you like it and you want to use it.
Twitter is a great place to do that. If you follow me on Twitter, bless your heart, because you probably see me adding a million people saying, hey, can I use this? Can I use that? I want to use this. So yeah, just adding people on Twitter and saying, hey, can I use this? They usually say yes. I mean, we're student journalists, so they're more likely to say yes. But yeah.
To our Asian American community, we will not tolerate violence and bigotry against you. And to those who perpetrate the violence and bigotry, we're going to pursue you to the full extent of the law.
And the bill received a 94-1 vote with Republican Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri as the lone opposer. And the bill will now move to the House and, if passed, will go to President Biden's desk.
Similar to what I said before, you can also get original sound bites by going to events, press conferences, or by interviewing people to include in your newscasts. So these are examples of OTSs, over-the-shoulder graphics. Basically, the point is to concisely just capture what the anchors are talking about. So you see, if I can get around. This is the OTS, all of these right here, and on that side too. So those are the over-the-shoulder graphics.
And also, it's worth mentioning, if you think a story can't be made into a package, you can always have your anchor read it and put a graphic next to them if you don't have enough information or you think it's not worth a story. So, yeah.
And then these are CG examples. So basically, think of CG as like a headline. So as the anchors are talking, CGs basically describe what the anchor is talking about in a few words or phrases. So Grant, do you want to point out? So we have, this is Chiron right here, and then on that side.
Yeah, this is our lower third here, and that's used, we have a graphics system called Chiron. There's lots of different similar ones to it, and so we just put the lower thirds there. And then this one is during the teaser of my show. That's my anchor Jay right there. And so he was teasing this package that was going to be playing later on in the show, and so we could have put maybe our logo there or something like that, but having that graphic element, something that can draw their eyes to it, makes the whole show more entertaining and engaging. So yeah.
Yeah, and then also oftentimes, you know, viewers, they might not be watching the whole show, so when they're tuning in at the moment, it's always good to have like Chiron up so that they know like what is going on and what's being talked about at that moment that they're tuning in. All right, so now we're going to talk about stacking a rundown. So the next step after you know what stories you want to include in your show is to build your rundown. And this can be a challenge, but it's a similar challenge to how you decide where stories are placed in a newspaper or a magazine. So when determining the order of how you want your stories to appear in your show, the first thing you can think about is whether there's breaking news. And that should typically come first because, especially if it affects your audience, depending on whether that's students or the local community. So some examples of that would be if there's a severe car crash near campus and it's affecting traffic around, or if there's a new rule in effect at school, or a new law passed by the city that's affecting residents. News values can also help play a role in your decision. So like timeliness, proximity, conflict, human interest, the more of these news values a story has, the greater chance it is that it's relatable and a story your audience will find important and interesting. And then, let's see, something else to consider is to order your stories from the most important at the top to the least important at the bottom, especially if your newscast is timed and needs to be a certain length. Because if you end up running out of time, you want to be able to start cutting stories from the bottom up. So putting the least important stories at the end makes it easier for you when you do need to remove stories because of timing issues. And then that's comparable to the inverted pyramid structure for print. like when you're writing a story, you start with the most important at the top and the least important at the bottom, so that, you know, your editor, when they're cutting facts from your story, it's easier for them to do it. So it's basically the same when you're building a rundown for broadcast. So this is an example of a rundown. So our school station uses an industry standard news production system called AP-EMPS to build rundowns, but they can also be made on Google Spreadsheets or Google Docs. So in my classes, our professor doesn't allow us to use this system, so we have to make all of our rundowns on Google Docs. So basically a rundown has all the elements for the show, and I do know not all schools have TV studios, so for anyone that has a studio or doesn't have one, the 4 most important columns are the segment number, the story slug, segment type, and the anchor. If you're able to fill out those columns, you can have a show. Everything else, like the videos and the graphics, are used to enhance your show, but they're not required elements. And then this is just another example of another rundown that we recently built. These are all from recent shows. And in terms of the producing live part, you can live stream your productions on social media platforms or on YouTube if you don't have a studio. Because for our session, we're talking about live news, but all of this applies to newscasts that aren't live either.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about social media, how it applies to your stories and your newscast. Like Emily mentioned, not every school has the ability to do a live news show, but you can still do very instant live content on social media. You don't want to use social media just to like tease things on your show, do behind the scenes. I know it's fun to do that stuff, but if you want to keep your viewers engaged, have that digital first mindset and then actually tell stories on the social media platforms. This Twitter thread to the right, Emily, I think if you click on it, it should open it. This is by my friend Maya Noah. She was covering the protests in Ithaca. We didn't have a show this day, or maybe we did, but this was early on in the day, so she wanted to cover it. But if you scroll down in this Twitter thread, she has so much content in here. She interviewed some people. I think she made a graphic down there too. So doing this very instant content, she did this the day that this protest happened here, is also really good. And then it accompanied by a live shot that night on the newscast as well, which was very well done by one of my friends, Mark. So yeah, that's a good example of a Twitter thread there. This one on the left I did here, I don't know why my advisor thought it was a good idea to let me go to a neighboring school while they were in a lockdown, but they did. And so I beat all the news stations there, and we didn't really know, we didn't have a show that day, and so we were kind of like, okay, well this needs to be, people need to know about this, but we don't have a show today. So we ended up just posting it on social media, and there's like one of the journalists that was at a neighboring station. She put the 100 emoji because I beat her to the story, so she was probably a little salty about that. So yeah, that's a stand-up. They were still in a lockdown while that was filmed. Some things you regret in life, and that's one of them. So yeah, that's that. But if there's an important story like I talked about the flood and you want to cover it, do it on social media. That's the best place to do it. So you don't have to wait for a show or something like that. But then also social media, you don't have to unmute it. It's probably loud. Okay. Social media can also accompany a newscast, right? You can have things. This was content this was my show that I produced. A chili cook-off, right? I talked about you don't want to cover events after they happen. You want to cover them before they happen to warn your audience. So this is a preview we have a bunch of big festivals in our town. It's one of the cool things about Ithaca. And so they have a chili cook-off. Like every restaurant in the entire city competes against each other. So we interviewed the communications director for the lady that did it, but she had a lot of extra important information that we wanted to post. So we did a different sought there. We did a nice caption and some more graphics. So that way people can go on your social media page and find more information of stuff that they saw on the show. And this story was in between being worthy of a package and worthy of just being a reader on a news show, right? There's not enough information. You can't get B-roll of an event that's about to happen. So we just did a reader on there because you don't want to cover something after it happened. I mean, you can, but it's better to not. So, yep, that's that right there.
Yeah.
And I think...
think
that
that is
it?
it.